Here in Yevamos on the last three words of Zayin Beis. The Gemara just finished saying that the explanation for why we need a pasuk of Allah to tell me that you don't do Yibum when it's a situation of erva is because we have a rule, even though it's a lav sheish b'kari, so you shouldn't need Allah. There would be no havamina to think that the Aseh Yibum should be Docheh. The Gemara said that there's an idea, hoil v'ishteri. Ula had told us by a case where somebody was a metzora, now he went through this process of purity, and now he's on the 8th day, which he needs to bring his karbanos. The 8th day happens to come out on the Erev Pesach, and at that point, he becomes a keri. He goes to the mikvah. He still is forbidden to go into the Azarah, Oraysa, until he has the Heter Shemesh. He's a tevul yom still, till the night. Okay, but if he's going to wait to bring his karbanos, then he's not going to be able to eat korban Pesach, so we say he should put his toe and his ear and also his right thumb in the Azarah, and they'll put the blood on those areas, and then he'll get his kapara, and now he'll be able to enter into Pesach and eat the korban Pesach that night. So the problem was that, why is that allowed? Ula at least holds that bia b'miksa shma bia. Going, even a part of the body that enters in is called going in, and the Torah says you can't go in if you're not completely tahor. So he said, hold issur. It was huter l'tzara. So the Torah gave a special heter. Even a metzora really can't go in. He's also tummy. But there's a special heter. The Torah says that every metzora could put these parts of the body into the Azarah for tzaras. Huter l'keri. So therefore, it also will carry with it an extra heter also for keri. So here we're up to Zayin Beis on the bottom. Midam Ula. How can you compare a mission to Ula? But Teinach, it depends on the case. I could give you the case. Teinach, very good. In the case We're going to talk right now about the erva of Achosisha, the sister, one's wife's sister. So in the case where the deceased, he had married his wife before the alive brother married his wife, because we're dealing with two brothers that married two sisters. That's how you have Eishes Ach and Achosisha. So Bishlama, in the case where the deceased had married first, and then the one who's alive married Demigo Dishri Isser Eishes Ach Ishri Nami Isser Achosisha, because we have Migo, that since the whole of Ishri Svara, once the forbidden issur of Eishes Ach, the Torah says is mutter because that's Yibum, the Torah takes away that issur of one's brother's wife. Okay, so that came first, and what comes second in this situation where the Chai had married second, making this woman of his brother's wife also his wife's sister? That's Achosisha. The Achosisha, which came in second, is also Ishteri, also becomes mutter. But in the case where the one who is alive right now had married first, so the issur Achosisha on this other woman who is falling to Yibum, who will fall to Yibum, had actually come first, and then the mace had married his wife, which makes an issur Eishes Ach on the alive brother. So Eishes Ach came second. Issur Achosisha called him. Achosisha came first. So who said you have a rule? Hold issur. In the case of Ula, the case was that first metzora, the 8th day in the morning after within his purity, the 8th day begins, and he has his heter to go into the Azarah. He then becomes a keri, and then goes to the mikvah. Hoil the ishteri will apply, because the first heter was on the saras, which the Torah said beferish, and the second heter, which the Torah didn't say beferish, which we want to say hoil the ishteri is on keri, but not in the reverse, where the keri would come first, like Gemara will say soon. I feel it also amazing. Even the case where the one who had died married first, not Bishlam, in the case where he married his wife and then he died, and then only after he died and the issur Eishes Ach became mutter, then the alive brother goes ahead and marries this woman's sister, making the Yevamos, who's falling, a sister of his wife, an Achosisha. Okay, at least before his marriage, right, between the death of the first brother and the marriage of the second brother to the sister, the woman who was Yevamos was ru'uya without any arayos issue. It was completely ishteri. Then you have whole of issur. But in the case where the mace had married first, and he did not die yet, and then the alive brother gets married. So Reuven and Shimon, Reuven marries Rachel, Shimon marries Leah. Only afterwards Reuven dies. So Reuven's wife Rachel became issur to Shimon even before the death of her husband. She became issur as achos isha, and only now the Torah is telling us there's a heter of issur. So that heter of issur didn't come as a pure heter ever, because it began with an issur achos isha. Milo Modi Ula, isn't Ula going to agree Shimra keri below Shmini in the case of Ula, that in the event that this man would have seen keri at the night before the night of the 8th, which you can't bring karbanos at night, so there was no heter to go into the Azarah yet. Wouldn't he agree that he's not allowed to put his hands in for the putting of the blood on his thumb? Because in this case, there was never a point in time that he was able to bring a korban, and then this heter pops in to put his hands in. Therefore, the Gemara says, so the first conclusive answer of this whole, the last 4 blot, comes down to this. The idea of whole of issur exists, but in a specific case. That's where Allah is, and that is where Reuven and Shimon, Reuven's married to Rachel, Shimon's married to Leah. Reuven, who married Rachel, dies. Reuven and Shimon. Reuven is married to Rachel. Reuven dies. Rachel is now falling to Yibum to Shimon. Now Shimon marries Rachel's sister Leah. In that case, we say, if not for Allah, I would have said whole of issur. Since the Torah matters, the issur of issur already mattered it completely. She was falling to Yibum. So now the Torah also matter the issur of achos isha. Says the pasuk, Allah, no. Since he got married to the sister, whether he was allowed to or not, but he did, now we're going to assur the Yibum. That's the first answer. Now the Gemara moves on to a whole different answer. If you want to say another answer to Allah, Aseh Docheh, we have a Hekesh of Rav Yonah. The pasuk says, Ki kol asher yasem kol tevul elav nichrusu. Anyone who does any of the rayus gets karis. So hukshu kol rayus kulon issur, we have a Hekesh between all the rayus to the erva of issur. They're all in that list. Issur as well. Ma issur shiur of kol rayus nami shiur. You would have thought, if not for Allah, that just like the Torah says Yibum is mutter, so the Torah took the issur of one's brother's wife and said it's mutter where there's no children. So you make a Hekesh, all the rayos are mutter. That's what you would have thought. So Allah tells me no, don't make the Hekesh. Was challenged Ravina like this. My cause is dakshus lachos isha akshinu leishazach. So he had a question. If this Hekesh is correct, that there would have been a havamina to make a Hekesh, then why is it not correct, even conclusively? Meaning, the Torah says issur is mutter, where there's no children. That's Yibum. The Torah says beferish through Allah that achos isha is issur. When the woman falls to Yibum as also an achos isha, she's going to be issur. Okay, but then we went further in the Brayso and we said all the rayos are going to be learned out through a metzora from achos isha. That was on Daf Gimel. Why are we learning out from achos isha? We could just as easily make a Hekesh, if the Hekesh is correct, to issur. Issur is mutter, achos isha is issur. So make the Hekesh to issur to say all the other rayos are mutter when they fall to Yibum as an erva. Only achos isha is the single erva that's issur. So we have we have a rule that when you have a choice of Hekesh to make a chumrah or a kula, it's just a halach l'mushmisina. The way that we go about it, we make the Hekesh to the chomer. Therefore, all the rayos are going to be hokesh to the erva of achos isha, making them all issur when they fall to Yibum. The second mahalach is hacha trei yisuri v'hacha trei yisuri v'trei bin trei alfinon. Avlacha chara yisura v'trei bin chara lo alfinon. The second answer is that when we have a choice between be makish here or there, we want to be makish. We want to pick out which one is it more similar to, and that's the one we should be makish. So in this case, it's more similar to achos isha that all the other arayos, when falling as a Yevamos, there's 2 issurim involved. Just like achos isha, when she falls as an Yevamos, there's 2 issurim, issur and achos isha, as opposed to the case of the regular Yibum case, Eshizach, which is mutter, there's only one issur. Eshizach, which the Torah says is mutter. So we're going to compare it to Achosish. Fine. So that's the second conclusive answer to the question of why you need Allah. And the answer is because you would have thought to be makish to Eshizach. And now the final, I believe it's the final answer, and that is Rava. Rava Omar Erva. Maybe there's another answer. We'll see. Rava is the third answer. Erva Kufa lo tzricha kara. That there was a mistake. We thought the whole time, like it sounded like on Daf Gimel in the Brayso, that the Allah is needed to say that the erva herself is not going to do Yibum. No. You don't need a pasuk that the erva doesn't do Yibum. The Aseh Docheh, like we thought. There's no havamina to think that it would work to do the Yibum. It's not Docheh the erva. Ki issur kra l'meser tzara. The pasuk's only needed to teach me that when you have two women falling to Yibum, and one of them is the erva, that the co-wife, the tzara, is going to be also exempt and also usher to Yibum. That's the whole purpose of Allah. The pasuk of issur by Achosisha through the Allah. The Gemara says, how can you say that? Veha katani. We said in that Oraysa on Daf Gimel Mebez, Einli Elahi. We said we through Allah. I only know that she's going to be usher. Mishum sarasa. Sorry, Einli Elahi question. So I only know that she's going to be usher. And then it goes on. How do I know tzara? We bring the pasuk of issur. Apparently, Allah is needed for her also. It's just we go on to say you also need to use it for issur, for the tzara. Gemara says mishum sarasa. It's lav dafka, and Eilahi is just leading up to the rest of the brayso to teach me tzara. But she would really never needed a pasuk to aser. Gemara says v'hakatani ein li elahein. But then the brayso continues, and the next line. Now that I know tzara from issur, ein li elahein, I only know them, the erva and her tzara. How do I know the tzara of the tzara, the co-wife of the co-wife? So again, it sounds like both she and her tzara are learnt out from Allah. Mishum tzara saying, my answer is no. Again, it's the word hein, which seems to implies and includes the erva herself was also part of the Hekesh. No, that was never included in the Hekesh. It's lav davka. It's just leading up to the. It's just referring to the tzara of the erva, and then agav we say the word hein, which seems to include the erva, but there was never a Hekesh. Okay, great. So that's the third mahalach. Says the Gemara. This part of the Gemara we'll see. We'll come back to this question in a minute. There's going to be a little bit more piece of Gemara just to finish up this whole last four blocks. But before we do that, we quote a brayso. Toshima, Rabbi Omer. Rabbi says, "V'lokach ulakacha v'yibim v'yibma, v'yabei v'yibma, l'asur tzaros v'arayos." So Rabbi is another version, another source, I should say, other than the brayso of Gimel Beis that comes to asur tzaros and arayos, perhaps, and the tzaros for sure. From Allah. Rabbi has a different source. For the pasuk, if you look over here on the side, it says, it says by Yibum, he should take the sister-in-law as a wife and do Yibum. So Rabbi is medaik. It says v'lokach with extra hey. He could have said ulokach, and he takes. So what's ulokach v'lokach? Take her. The extra hey, her, is supposed to imply a exclusion. Only her. V'yabim v'yima. Again, same thing. And he does Yibum. But then it says with a, and he does Yibum to her, with her. So again, it applies a specific woman, uniquely coming to exclude certain women. Says Rabbi, coming to exclude the tsaros, the co-wives, and the arayos. So that's his source of our Mishnah, that the arayos and the tsaros don't do Yibum. So the Gemara says, you see, it's part of the conversation. I shouldn't have said it. It's a new piece. It's a raya that you see that the erva also needs a pasuk, because he has two pasukim here. One of them is for the erva. It's a kasha Rava who said that erva doesn't need a pasuk. Says so switch the girsa. Or Rebbe means that the pasuk is going to teach to asur the tsaros of the arayos, but the arayos don't really need a pasuk. Marsa, what do you mean? He brought two pasukim. He darshan two hayes there. One of them is apparently for the tzara. One for the erva, one for the tzara. My lab chalo erva chalo tzara, and one for the erva tzara. Lo idvi lo tzara. No, Gemara says they're really going to both be for tzara. Why do you need two psukim to teach me tzara? And it says the Gemara chad meser tzara b'makom mitzvah. So the first one is what we were dealing with till now. That it's going to say a tzara of an erva does not do yibum when she's falling as a yevama, where there's a mitzvah. It's a situation of mitzvah. The second one is coming to teach me that if you don't try to apply that issur to all situations where the tzara happens to be a tzara of an erva, but there's no yibum involved. Like we had back on Daf Gimel. The tzara shalom b'makam mitzvah is completely mutter. So, for example, just to go through the case, right? The first case on Daf Bezim and Aleph was Bito. His bas is falling as a Yevamos, so her tzara is aser when she's falling as a Yevamos. But if someone's daughter gets married to Reuven happens to have another wife, Leah. Now Reuven dies. So Leah's mutter to this man. Leah's mutter to her co-wife's father. There's no mitzvah involved. And that's coming from this pasuk. You would have thought she's aser. Says the pasuk, she's mutter. Where do you see in the pasuk? My timer. Yibum v'yima. The makom Yibum hu dasira tzara shel makom yishar tzara. The first pasuk is v'lakav v'lacha. He has to take her, only her, and not the tzara of an erva. Only a woman who's not a tzara of an erva. But says the pasuk, it qualifies that by saying only when it's a situation of Yibum. Only specifically that. If it's not Yibum, he could take the tzara of a erva. Says the Gemara. It's implied in the Mishnah like this. It's implied in the Mishnah like Rava's pshat, this third pshat of the Gemara. Why you need Allah, or why you need a pasuk to Aser? Because you don't need it for the erva herself. You only need it for the tzara. The Mishnah sounds like that, because the Mishnah says, back on the base, the 50 women, pater, they exempt their tzaros. Don't say the Mishnah, they are exempt, and they also exempt their tzaros. You see from here that there was no chiddush. There was no chiddush that they're exempt, of course. The whole chiddush of the Mishnah is to teach that Aseh is that the tzara of the erva is not going to do Yibum. Says the Gemara, you're telling me that erva doesn't need a pasuk because Aseh is not docheh where there's kares. So the Gemara assumes in this question that Saras erva is assumed to be Asr. Every Saras erva. Because it says in the pasuk by Achosisho, back on the pasuk in the Gemara on Daf Gimel Beis, Litzur, don't take a wife, a sister of one's wife as a wife. One cannot be Baal one's wife's sister, Litzur, to take her as a co-wife. We darshan from Litzur that a co-wife of one's erva is Asr. We're thinking right now in this question that it doesn't matter if there's a mitzvah involved, not a mitzvah, a co-wife of an erva is Asr. So if the co-wife of an erva is Asr, the Gemara is asking here, there should be no need to come and say that she is Asr through Aleha or Rebbe's pasuk v'lacha, right? Of course she's Asr. Aseh Docheh should be a karis. So Rava actually, in this version, he's not like he sounded like before. He comes and says, you're right, you don't need a pasuk. Erva or her tzara are assumed to be aser without any pasukim, because litzor. Ki issur kra, on the base, one more liner, lemishri tzara shlom b'makam mitzvah. It's only coming to matter the tzara where there's no mitzvah. My time, how do you read that in the pasuk? Because the pasuk says only if it's an Allah situation, Allah, which is written by Yibum, then she's asur like we would have thought always litzur. But it's coming to say if you don't have the Allah, the litzur that's in the pasuk by Achosisha is not going to be applied, and therefore a tzara of an erva where there's no mitzvah is actually going to be mutter. So we'll stop over here. But what comes out so interesting now, it's a whole turnaround. That the Gemara in this last 15 lines, starting with Rava and this final way of explaining Rava, in the version at the end, is that the truth is there's no need for psukim to aser erva or tzaras erva, because the starting point of before you start darshaning aleha of the Brayis on the Gimel is Oraysa are beferish aser, and even saros from litzur in the pasuk of Achosisha comes to aser every tzaras erva, whether it's a mitzvah or not. And right, where do you need the pasuk of Allah? It's only to teach me that a tzara where there is no mitzvah, the tzara of an erva is mutter. And that the Brayis on Dif Gimel has its source, Allah, and Rebbe on Oben Aleph has a different source, v'yabim v'yima. Okay, we're going to stop here. Is there a little more in this conversation? Let's see. I guess we'll stop here. Yashikach.